Brandon Thurston from WrestleMania is up next, and we're going to follow Brandon with John Pollock from Post Wrestling.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone.
But we can't ignore the math, okay? We can't ignore the data.
Go on Google Trends, type in your name, then type in mine. You're a straight line, I'm a pyramid.
I like the very direct question on that.
Television ratings, downward spiral. Buy rates, plummeting.
The time is now to turn the math around.
Welcome to Pollock and Thurston on Wednesday, February the 19th. I am John Pollock, joined by Brandon Thurston. Brandon.
Hello.
It's been so long.
Since when?
Since the last time we spoke.
It's been, we've spoken many times today.
Yes, you and I have been face-to-face on, I think this is our third go-around today. But
yes, it is.
This is the main event, folks. Here we are for another edition of the show. We are going to be chatting about many notable topics. Brandon is going to put an end to all the confusion over Netflix data. He is going to make it all easy to understand. He's going to give us the Thurston formula, where we're going to get some clarification from Netflix. You got someone from Netflix on the record.
Imagine that.
It's not the easiest task sometimes when it comes to covering these worlds, but that is going to be coming up. We'll talk a little bit about AEW news. If you're a WWE stockholder, fasten that seatbelt. We will have some potential, some news items that are percolating as well. But the big story we are talking about off the top, we were here last Wednesday. It was like the tailgate party before Linda McMahon's confirmation hearing, and then Thursday morning, everyone sat down, and I mean, I heard viewing parties right across the nation. Brandon, people were gathering in this era where everyone talks about monoculture events that are few and far between outside of live sports. I mean, this was really it. It was this and Saturday Night Live on this past Sunday night. But everyone got together, including a family photo that we also had for the American public to digest on Thursday.
Yes, we had Paul Levesque was there, WWE Chief Content Officer. Stephanie McMahon was there. Shane McMahon was there. Someone was seated next to Shane McMahon. I don't think that's Marissa McMahon.
I don't think it is. I was mistaken, assuming it was Marissa, but I don't believe it. It made me think of like the last time we've seen Marissa just in public, period. Like she had this documentary that came out in 2018, and I'm pretty sure I saw her around that time, but she has been a rather figure in the background. But yes, there was this other woman that I guess identity to be determined.
Yes. So, but yeah, and then someone was seated to the left of Stephanie. There were protesters at times shouting things. And we could see, of course, whenever these Senate hearings happen, you usually have family members who are seated immediately behind the person who's being grilled. And so we saw Paul Levesque and Stephanie McMahon. And Shane McMahon was a little off camera throughout the entire confirmation hearing, about 2 hours.
How did you feel Stephanie and Paul Levesque worked the hard camera?
I think they might need to go to the Washington, D.C. Performance Center to get familiarized with the way that the Senate does things. But, it's a good start.
They had pretty like they were not selling anything. They were just like no nods. I mean, there was very little reaction from them as well. Shane was kind of more off camera. So, I mean, it was noteworthy that Paul was, there were tweets going out from his account during this hearing promoting NXT. But I know many people Thursday morning, were they going to be able to digest 2.5 hours? That's a lot of time in this content proliferation age. So here, everybody, courtesy of John Pollock and Brandon Thurston, here is your 60 seconds of highlights as Linda McMahon sat down and, man, she was going to be grilled.
I am honored to join you today to introduce President Trump's nominee for Secretary of Education, my friend, Linda McMahon.
Congratulations on your nomination.
Thank you.
Look forward to your confirmation, hopefully. And I would just simply ask you if you believe that education is foundational to the opportunity to live your version of the American dream.
There's a possibility, you're saying, that public schools that run
African American history classes could lose federal funding if they continue to teach African American history?
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that I would like to take a look at these programs and fully understand the breadth of the executive order and get back to you on that.
I know that you agree with this, but I want to ask anyway, can't the state of Indiana do a whole lot better of a job of spending dollars on education rather than bureaucrats in Washington, D.C.?
Ms. McMahon, please suspend. The committee will come to order. Capitol Police are asked to remove the individual from the room.
I don't think she knows how to read.
Oh my goodness! There you go. If you missed the hearing, those are some of your high points of this hearing. I think I counted no less than 4 protesters, which were just completely insulted here by several of the senators. And yes, this has been a common occurrence throughout these hearings. But I don't know if Linda McMahon takes the cake for the most protesters throughout a particular hearing.
No, I mean, it's been pretty normal for all of these Senate confirmation hearings to be interrupted by shouts of protesters at one time or another.
Yes. I didn't see the Freedom of Speech Brigade defending these folks that were railing against us. Can't censor me. It's selective First Amendment rights. But there we have the confirmation hearing for Linda McMahon, and I mean, overall, it was, I would say, a pretty smooth process for Linda McMahon overall. Like, she was faced with the topics that you would most assume for someone that would be heading the Department of Education, mainly the like, what is the decision to essentially dismantle like the federal department and hand over the reins of education to the states, and what this is going to mean. So, I mean, that was 95% of the questions, but we did have one from Senator Tammy Baldwin, who did stay up reading about the Ring Boy lawsuit in advance.
We're going to play that clip?
Oh, let's hear it.
Mrs. McMahon, you have been named in a lawsuit, which alleges that you and your husband allowed for systemic and pervasive abuse of underage children to persist in your business for years. It is an ongoing lawsuit, and it alleges that you rehired a known sexual predator, and you felt it was sufficient to simply direct him to steer clear of children. If confirmed, you will be responsible with overseeing the Department of Education Office of Civil Rights, charged with ensuring equal access to education through vigorous enforcement of civil rights laws. I am so concerned about whether sexual assault survivors on campus can trust you to support them.
Thank you, Senator. They certainly can trust me to support them. I have a granddaughter that is now in college. I have 2 grandsons who are in college. And I have a deep commitment of understanding of how I would feel if any of them were involved in sexual harassment or accused of sexual harassment. You have my absolute commitment that I will uphold and protect those investigations to make sure that those students are treated fairly on both sides.
Did Tammy Baldwin have any follow-ups after this, Brandon?
No, she tried to ask another question about a shooting. I'm guessing she was going to talk about a school shooting, but then she was interrupted because she ran out of time. Everyone has, I think, 5 minutes or something like that.
So Tammy Baldwin was the only one that addressed the Ring Boy lawsuit, and well, I thought she framed it well. There was just no direct question, and
Is that really the time or place, though, to ask about these sort of things?
You're right. It should be the next time that Linda McMahon is in front of senators and has to face open scrutiny about active cases against her as a defendant. I didn't want to be the one to
upset the mood in the room. I have to say,
you beat me to my own joke. Got to preserve the mood here in this among senators. Okay, really brought the mood down. Again, she is. I give her credit for at least bringing this up, but it was like Linda McMahon is very seasoned in these types of positions. That, like, what is PR 101? don't answer the questions that you aren't asked. And she was not asked anything. We went from a great setup to anything that could have been, who was Mel Phillips? What was the conditions of his 1988 release and rehiring? Why should we be entrusting you when you were given a much smaller company to oversee? And now you are going to be overseeing a federal department dedicated to education among young children. But none of that was addressed, and Linda McMahon really did not have to address any of the Ring Boy lawsuit, and I don't think it wasn't going to be followed up by any of the other senators either after her question.
No, I would say it was not even the most controversial thing that came out of this hearing. Probably the questions from Senator Chris Murphy about whether or not having Black History Month type of events in school would amount to a DEI program, and she seemed to say no, but she would look into it, and Murphy took issue with that, and I think that might have been the most. If there's a negative story to come out of this for her, it would be that. But overall, I mean, just saying that was maybe the most negative thing that happened. This was not one of the more controversial negative stories for the Trump administration, I would say, as far as these Senate hearings go.
No, I think this one went by fairly seamlessly among a lot of the nominees, and I don't think anyone is expecting anything but a confirmation for Linda McMahon to come out of this, albeit with a active case that is still going on in relation to the Ring Boy lawsuit. But I know what everyone is asking you on your timeline, Brandon. Well, wait a minute. Can't Donald Trump just get rid of this case? Can't he just get rid of this civil case?
The civil lawsuit in federal court. We have not seen that kind of. I hesitate to use certain language. By the way, it's been on the screen, but for anybody just listening to audio, yes, this program will contain substantial political content. Just to give everybody a heads up there. There's three. We're going to do civics class here. There's three different what do we call them? Co-equal branches of government. There's the executive branch, the judicial branch, and the legislative branch. Trump basically is the executive branch, you could say. He has significant influence over the legislative branch with the Republican Party, who's currently controlled the Senate and the House. The judicial branch is pretty independent, even though he did appoint a lot of the judges who are federal judges or Supreme Court justices. But for him to just whimsically intervene in a civil case, that would be a level of a constitutional challenge, let's say, that we have not yet seen, as abnormal as this administration may be.
Yes, you see, these branches of government all stem from a tree. And despite Donald Trump's aversion to playing a tree on Saturday Night Live, he believes he is that tree, and these are my branches.
Yes. Is that something that I didn't watch the SNL 50?
This was a story about when Donald Trump had hosted the show, a very polarizing decision in their history. But yes, he refused to play a tree because he was not into playing a tree. So yes, there is
the long and short of it is, though, there's no obvious way, and I don't think there's any precedent yet in Trump's habits so far that suggests that he's going to intervene in this federal civil lawsuit. Pardons are one thing when somebody's under a criminal indictment or some sort of criminal trouble, but that's not what the Ring Boy lawsuit is. The Ring Boy lawsuit is a civil lawsuit. It is not a criminal case. We could get into the Vince stuff, but there's no reason I see at this point to believe that the Trump administration has intervened in any of the Linda McMahon or Vince McMahon legal issues right now.
Yeah, it would be one thing if we were talking about a potential pending indictment for a Vince McMahon that you could certainly, I don't think it would be conspiratorial to look at that avenue. But as long as these are civil cases on behalf of Janelle Grant and from the Ring Boys, I think that these are kind of separate entities that you cannot just snap your fingers and make them go away either. So
if he were to be indicted, which he has not been, he's not been charged with any crimes, although he apparently at least was under investigation from prosecutors at Southern District, New York. If he was indicted, it could have been the case that Trump would have pardoned him, and that would have gotten him out of criminal legal trouble. But that has not even come to pass. No indictment has happened.
He could become mayor of New York if he was indicted.
There you go.
he could be, potential candidate. So we also have a guest on this week's show, and we are going to be playing that interview now. This is with Aaron Rupar, who is a reporter over at publicnotice.co, and that outlet recently ran David Bixenspan's piece last week on the eve of Linda McMahon's confirmation hearing, going through the Ring Boy lawsuit and a lot of the key details that David has been reporting on for years and years. So we thought this would be a great chance to have Aaron on the show to kind of react to the hearing and some of the key.
And just for some context for people who Aaron Rupar is, if you've ever seen political video clips on Twitter or Blue Sky, you've probably seen his postings of various clips from cable news and things like that.
All right. Here is Aaron Rupar on Pollock and Thurston. Aaron Rupar from Public Notice joins us now as we are going to be talking about the cabinet position that is in waiting for one Linda McMahon, whose confirmation hearing went down last Thursday. I just have to start with an overall question for you, Aaron. We are coming up, tomorrow will mark a month since the inauguration day. How long have these 4 weeks felt like for you?
Boy, can you see the bigs under my eyes? A few years for sure. Actually, when you said that it's going to be a month tomorrow, that was kind of jarring to me because it feels like it's been much, much longer. But I just don't see how we can keep up on this pace for 4 years. Something's going to have to give, I think. But yeah, I mean, in the grand scheme of the horrors of the Trump administration, Linda McMahon is probably kind of a minor player. But, in a normal situation, it would be a big scandal that she is being nominated and probably will be confirmed for her role.
And before we just get to Linda specifically, when you are conveying this news on a daily basis, how do you feel like your readership, your audience is keeping up? Is this just the velocity is almost like it's almost forcing an exhaustion or apathy at a certain point? Like, do you feel that like the public is being able to keep up with this? That's obviously very strategic in nature by throwing so much at people that you can only digest so much.
Yeah, my audience is pretty highly engaged, on my newsletter, Public Notice. So I don't sense that they're, kind of worn out or one thing that I have been cognizant of, though, is trying not to kind of overwhelm people with nonstop bad news. So we have a newsletter coming on Friday about like how AOC has really emerged as kind of a leading voice for the resistance. And we did a post last week on the Associated Press being kind of a model for effective press resistance as they're being banished from the briefings over, the Orwellian censorship of the Trump administration. Oh, wow. You even have it pulled up right there. That's great. So yeah, I mean, that's been kind of more my focus, is just trying to make sure that we're not overwhelming people with nonstop negativity, even though positive news can be pretty hard to find.
Yeah. And as far as the hearing itself, which is a big topic for us today, I mean, there's one thing that we were considering going into it is would this Ring Boy lawsuit be brought up? And it was only brought up once, which is not all that surprising to me. But it was brought up by Senator Tammy Baldwin, and there was one question, and it was asked in a way where it was framed well, but there was an easy off ramp for Linda to talk about things like sexual harassment investigations. Did you expect anything different from that?
I didn't really expect anything different from that. If you go back to like the Pete Hegseth confirmation hearing, which was one of the first ones, Tim Kaine, who's a Democratic senator from Virginia, really made a big deal in his line of questioning over some of the allegations against Pete in terms of being drunk at work and the sexual abuse and harassment, rape allegation even. And it just seems, I think Democrats have kind of, one of the things that they took from Trump winning and kind of his first term is that, the sorts of allegations just don't really break through. And I think especially in the Linda one, since it's, she is directly involved in the Ring Boy stuff, but, still it's mainly a Vince McMahon thing, even if her name does appear in some of the lawsuits and, she was involved. When you kind of stack it up next to Pete Hegseth, being accused of rape and being accused of being drunk at work constantly, it seems kind of like I don't want to say small potatoes, but not as big of a deal as some of the other allegations, or even Trump, who was convicted of found liable for defaming a woman who accused him of sexually assaulting her. So this is kind of the world that we live in. And I think Dems have kind of backed off some of that stuff. And the other just reality here is that with 53 votes for Republicans, the cake was kind of baked for Linda McMahon that she was going to get confirmed. I mean, we've seen every single one of these nominees has been confirmed. The only one that flamed out was Matt Gaetz. And, I really believe that had he gone all the way to a confirmation hearing, he probably would have been confirmed too, because, Republicans are pretty much cowed by Trump at this point, and you would need 4 Republicans to vote down a nominee for them not to be confirmed. And that just isn't happening.
I don't think anyone went into this hearing with the thought that Linda McMahon would be a candidate that was going to face like much resistance. I think everyone expects this one to be rubber stamped. From your vantage point, like outside of once Matt Gaetz was set aside, which various nominees for these positions did you suspect might face some of that level of resistance, or did you think that this was going to be rather smooth sailing for a lot of these candidates?
The two to me that seemed like they were a little bit of a question mark were RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard. RFK because some of his anti-vax views are not held by Republican senators, such as Senator Bill Cassidy, who's actually a doctor from Louisiana. But of course, Cassidy ended up caving and voting for RFK. And then Tulsi because her fondness for people like Snowden and some of the false equivalency she's pushed between the U.S. and the Putin regime, kind of cut against the neoconservative, projecting power, foreign policy views that, Senate Republicans at least used to have. And of course, Mitch McConnell voted against her, but he was the only Republican who did. So those were the two going in where I had some questions, just because those two nominees had views that cut against some mainstream Republican positions. But, I think ultimately we saw that, there's a big fear factor at play here where if these Republicans vote against Trump's picks, they're opening themselves up to a primary challenge that could be well funded by Elon Musk. And so I think that fear, kind of that existential fear for their own positions, I think motivated, most of these Republicans, the vast majority of them, to toe the line.
And I remember even going back to the SBA hearing that Linda McMahon had in 2017, right? She was introduced by the Democratic Connecticut senators Blumenthal and Chris Murphy. But I've understand Chris Murphy has said things to the effect of Democrats should not even be confirming any of these nominees, and so it sounds like she's probably not going to get any votes from the Democratic side, right?
I think that's a fair assumption. Especially, it's a very weird position that Linda McMahon finds herself in right now, where she is being nominated to run an agency that Trump has vowed to close down. And she kind of expressed support for that during her confirmation hearing. Their view is that education should be sent back to the states, and if the federal government has any involvement, it should be just on the level of kind of sending funds to the states that they determine how to spend. And there was kind of a kabuki theater about it, which I think Senator Hassan from New Hampshire called out during the confirmation hearing, where she was pointing out, Linda was saying things to the effect of, we really need to take seriously anti-Semitism on college campuses, and the Department of Education is the agency that will make sure that happens. And then Hassan pointed out, well, aren't you trying to, basically end the Department of Education? So how can you, kind of affirm that you're going to take anti-Semitism on college campuses seriously with your agency, which you're also trying to demolish at the same time? So, there is kind of that surreal, almost kind of dystopian aspect to a lot of these hearings. But I think just given what we've seen, in terms of the unlawful actions from the Trump administration this first month, the impoundment of funds, the unilateral tearing down of agencies, that at this point I couldn't really see Democrats giving any more votes to these nominees, and they probably shouldn't have been giving votes to these nominees in the first place.
Have they been voting for any of them? Have there been any Democratic votes?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these, a lot of the there's been bipartisan votes almost for all of them. So, Marco Rubio, for instance, I don't think there was a single Democrat who voted against Marco Rubio. It was I think it was 99-0 with I think JD Vance didn't end up voting, or they hadn't replaced him yet at that point. But yeah, there's been many, Fetterman has voted for a number of these nominees. So, and I think that kind of gets back to, the election was a decisive outcome. And I think Democrats don't want to be seen as being hysterical or kind of just blindly obstructing the Trump administration. I guess that kind of, from a certain vantage point, made sense going in. But now that we see that, the Trump administration, whatever you thought the worst case scenario was, I think, it's maybe even worse than that in terms of the unlawful activity and the flouting of laws and kind of selling out our allies abroad, siding with Putin more so than Trump even did in his first term. I think we see that it's, going to be a very unlawful administration. And so any pretense that there was that Dems should play nice and kind of just go along with the program, I think is out the window at this point.
There's very few people that we can look back to from circa 2016 that have remained in that circle of Trump. Like, it really is just this revolving door of people that are of use to Donald Trump until they're not. Linda McMahon has been one of those constants. And what is some of your thought on how Linda has kind of navigated this very divisive figure that, tends to have like a very, he is not loyal to all of these people, but if you show loyalty, it's like you can certainly be one that hangs on. And Linda McMahon is like, she has never run afoul of Donald Trump publicly.
Yeah, I think that's the key thing that you just said, that, she's kind of kept her head down. When she's spoken out publicly, it's been, kind of blindly in support of Trump. Even I can't recall off the top of my head, but I don't even think after January 6th, she made a peep about, oh boy, that was bad, or, the president should have done more to rein it in. And she's extremely wealthy. Obviously, she has the bona fides of at least having run for the Senate a couple times. I think her connections in terms of being a McMahon, probably help. Of course, at her confirmation hearing, you can see right behind her, there was Triple H and Stephanie McMahon, and I think that doesn't hurt her. Just, the fact that she has that kind of cultural crossover to an extent. Not that she was ever like a big star in WWE, but, her family is obviously kind of the first family of wrestling, even if Vince has been sort of cast aside at this point. But yeah, I think the main thing is that, she's been diligent. She didn't really embroil herself in any huge scandals. The first time around, Trump obviously never saw fit to kind of fire her by tweets or anything like that. And, but her role here is kind of a secondary role in terms of being the head of the Department of Education, because, again, this is an agency that Trump campaigned on ending. And so it's not exactly, like making Marco Rubio Secretary of State, where he's a powerful figure involved in these high stakes negotiations with Russia at this point. She's going to be basically unwinding the agency that she's going to be running. So it's kind of a different position.
And I'm curious to get your thoughts on the illusion that people often make between politics and pro wrestling, especially in recent years as Trump has become the president, and his connections with the McMahon family and his connections appearing on WrestleMania and things like that. I guess like my thought is that it's showed that at least, people often refer to how, well, there's this kayfabe element and there's the illusions that they're upkeeping, just like in pro wrestling. But I think it's sort of even more the case that it's shown that pro wrestling, that politics can be like pro wrestling, in that it's about the personalities and it's about the promos, and the things that actually make for meaningful policy. Well, that's just for nerds. That's just for wonks and people who are just nerds about that. So do you have any thoughts on that? Is that something that you're really seeing? Is Trump really using elements of pro wrestling in his politics and communication?
Yeah, definitely. I think with Trump, it's people do like his kind of heel promos. And, it's funny. I was even thinking about this the other day, where you guys probably saw the clip of the national anthem being booed down at the hockey game in Montreal when it was U.S. and versus Canada up in Montreal. And it brought me back to kind of the Bret Hart 97, where, it's like Trump is a huge heel in Canada, but, here in the States, it's kind of the inverse of the Bret thing, where Trump is a heel in Canada, but a babyface to some, at least here. And, I think when you see people who are expressing angst about, Democrats and their response, a lot of what it really boils down to is that people don't like their promos. They come across as kind of like flat, and, they don't really have any heat. There's no heat. They don't really get the heat that you want, where we want people to be fired up and really cutting heated promos. And, Dems don't, for the most part, seem to have that in them, with the exception maybe like an AOC or a Bernie Sanders, people like that, who, have the kind of mic skills. They've demonstrated that in the past. And so, with Trump, I think people do kind of like the gimmick, in terms of, his attacks on the press and how he kind of denigrates people. And, he kind of has a tweener character, and it's obviously very polarizing. But yeah, I do think that, my background being a lover of pro wrestling, going back to when I was a kid, it did actually, in kind of a weird way, prepare me well to cover American politics these days, because there is a lot of kayfabe, and the promos are huge because most voters, I think, don't really get into the minutia of policy. If you're interested in politics on that level, you probably already have your mind pretty well made up about who you're supporting. And I think the people that kind of decide these elections maybe see a promo on social media, that they see a clip here and there, and that's what impacts their voting decisions. Now, I will say that I think that'll change, if Trump comes for people's health care, if he comes for, elder people's Social Security, then I think facts on the ground will be more important. But in the environment that we're in right now, I do think optics and just kind of those viral clips make a big difference.
I think it's such a key in all of this is just like whatever your opinion is when it comes to this, like the Republican messaging system, it is like their messaging meets its audience and everyone in the party just falls in line. And you look at if Linda McMahon were on the other side of the fence and she were on the like a target of the Republican Party, they would annihilate this woman. Like for just anything that is a perceived weakness, that's all we need. The perception of a weakness that we can attack. And I think that is where I think the Democratic side right now, they're sort of in this, like we're just deer in the headlights. Like what is our strategy going to be here? And the public is sort of like with bated breath seeing like, what is the response here? We're seeing this happening in real time. And the messaging game is one that I think the Republicans are just doing like such a effective job by just, you don't have to be constrained to facts or truths. It's what resonates with our audience. And that is the promo ability of them to communicate to their public that's receiving everything.
Yeah, I think Republicans have kind of relentless message discipline where we saw this during the campaign. There wasn't really a faction of the GOP that was anti-Trump anymore. Trump, and his followers did a good job purging all those people. Where I don't know, good job is probably the wrong way to characterize it, but an effective job at least, especially after January 6th. And so, yeah, whatever Trump said was kind of the message for the whole party. And then on the other side, there were issues like Gaza, which really hurt Biden, I think, among younger Democratic voters. And we saw the protests on college campuses about a year ago that were largely directed towards the Biden administration. And so I think that's one of the reasons that Trump ended up being able to win was that the Democratic coalition was just fractured enough where, some people stayed home, some people voted third party. I think it was mainly more the staying home. And then, you had the people in the middle who I think, like the Black voters, the Latino voters, just enough of whom, went over to Trump, who probably were attracted by some of the promos he was cutting on immigrants, for instance, and the hardline stance that he took about deporting undocumented immigrants and things like that, kind of a law and order messaging that appealed to people where, again, it was more the optics and the substance because I think we're seeing already, that with the immigration stuff, I think Trump is not really following through in what he campaigned on in terms of like the huge scale mass deportations. But when the rubber meets the road on a lot of these policies, the, really draconian crime policies or deportation, I don't think people are going to like these in practice, but, they like to hear Trump kind of project strength. And, I think that was one of the reasons he was able to win last November.
You can follow Aaron on both X and Blue Sky. I'm sure you have a wide variety of opinions that are espoused on both outlets, and all of your work can be found at publicnotice.co. David Bixenspan actually has a piece up there entitled "Linda McMahon is much worse than you think," and I think everyone listening to this show is very familiar with a lot of Bixenspan's reporting on the Ring Boy lawsuit, and it's a very incredible, concise read here of just going through a lot of the history and Linda McMahon's involvement in it and such. But thanks so much for taking some time out, Aaron, to try and make sense of all of this for us.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on. David does great work. And if you're interested in my wrestling opinions, check my replies because every now and then I'll mix in some wrestling takes in my replies. I don't put them on main because that's not really, fully my my audience. But, I'm a huge wrestling fan. You'll see some wrestling takes in the replies now and then. So thanks for having me on.
Thanks, Aaron.
And we are back, everybody. And that was Aaron Rupar joining us to chat about the Linda McMahon confirmation hearing last week and all of the dynamics at play when it comes to the political breakdown in the United States.
Yes. We're ready to talk about the latest with what's happening in Ukraine now.
Oh, that was next on the list. Yeah, I was going to go through. I think we hit everything in there. We included January 6th, Elon Musk, Gaza. I think everything that was accounted for there. So you're looking forward to all the feedback to this particular show. I know. So send all of your feedback to Brandon Thurston. There was also, as we kind of close out the chapter here on Linda McMahon, there was also an article last week that came out after we did our show, but before the hearing with NBC. Nothing like a late night article for a light read before you go to sleep. And this included one of the John Does in the lawsuit speaking to NBC under anonymity, but stating that in this, from the article, a ring boy who is a plaintiff in the lawsuit told NBC News that he suffered physical and sexual abuse by Mel Phillips, who died in 2012. Quote, "It definitely was not a safe place for a child to be," said the former ring boy, who requested anonymity. He said it was exciting to be a part of WWE and to meet the wrestlers and be on the road and do things that normal kids did not get to do. But he said that Mel Phillips could strike out at any time. He would force himself on us. He would just throw you down on the ground and use wrestling to sexually abuse the boys. And it goes on to describe a lot of the history involving Mel Phillips, what was reported on at the time in 1992 by Phil Mushnick of the New York Post, the status of the lawsuit, and also quoting Lee Cole, who is the brother of the late Tom Cole, towards the end of the piece on several paragraphs. And it even noting that Lee Cole, a Donald Trump supporter that is, obviously not on board with Linda McMahon's nomination for this post, given this story and its proximity to him directly.
Yeah. So then this was probably I would say the biggest mainstream coverage that the ring boy scandal got in advance of the hearing, to go so far as to actually interview one of the ring boys, to get quotes from him, get quotes from Lee Cole, who identifies as a Trump supporter, but is a little conflicted about the Linda McMahon nomination, because he's been so vocal about the allegations that the ring boys have against WF.
Yeah. So that is everything to note on Linda McMahon, as her voting will take place. She should be pretty much installed into this position and will be somebody of note throughout this administration, I feel, depending on whatever becomes of the Department of Education. Her job is essentially, in Donald Trump's words, to work herself out of a job.
Yes.
And then what will she be doing after that?
I don't know. Maybe she'll just be done and she won't be in the cabinet anymore.
Okay. Well, that's quite the job to undertake. So let's move on, because we have a bunch of other topics to get to on today's show. Let's dive over onto, is there anything you want to say, Brandon, on the Vince McMahon investigation, just wrapping up anything that we spoke about last week? I know you have had some contact with legal authorities in terms of law professors, we should say. You have not been talking to the feds or anything.
With attorneys. I've spoken with attorneys to try to get their opinion on what's going on. So to get everybody up to speed, right? Last week we discussed that there was this appeals court ruling related to the notion that, as it concerns the actual SDNY criminal investigation, which has so far resulted in no charges, the McMahon side says it's all over, it's all said and done. They believe that, or they say that everything has been dropped. They got New York Post to report that and CNN to report that. But we have that appeals court ruling that is from 2 Fridays ago that says this was an ongoing grand jury investigation, which suggests that this is actually maybe not dropped. So I believe one possibility is that from Friday, February 7th, maybe they were told more explicitly that the case is not going to move forward. That's one possibility. If the case had been dropped, I've spoken to attorneys that say that there would be a docket entry on the case that the appeals judges would probably be aware of. But nonetheless, they wrote on Friday, February 7th, that it was an ongoing investigation. And I raised the question about why would the appellants, who are Vince McMahon, and we believe it's highly likely that it's Vince McMahon and Jerry McDevitt and Kane L. Gates, who are the appellants who are trying to claim attorney-client privilege, why would they not just withdraw their appeal if the case had actually been dropped? And maybe they just found out that they're not going to move forward, but in between the time at which the story broke last week and the Friday before. So that's a possibility. I tend to think, maybe what's happening here as it relates to this criminal investigation is maybe it's just the case that Vince's side would like everybody to believe that this is just about minor accounting errors, right? And that you don't see anything in the appeals court filing that pertains to an investigation specific to sexual assault allegations. There's plenty of information in there about NDAs, but there's not information in there related to sexual assault allegations. So that is consistent with their claim that this is not about anything else. I think what might have happened, and this is just my read, it's just my theory about what has unfolded here. This is a case that is sealed to the public, so we cannot see what's going on. We finally found out what the case number was, which was big to me. I can actually look it up now, but I can't see anything, can't even see the docket. It's possible what has happened here, even though the Wall Street Journal did report a year ago that there are that part of the investigation was specifically about sexual assault and sex trafficking as alleged by Janelle Grant. NBC had a similar report about a year ago. What might have happened is that if you consider all the allegations that we do know of, yes, there are 7 different women across time who have accused Vince McMahon of sexual misconduct of one kind or another. In some cases, we know that that's sexual assault. In some cases, it could be sexual harassment. Nonetheless, all the allegations that we know of, except for Janelle Grant's allegations, are from 10 years ago or earlier, which may raise some statute of limitations challenges as it relates to the alleged sex crimes, right? It might be difficult for them to mount a case on sex trafficking using only Janelle Grant's allegations. So that may be why perhaps they're not moving forward, and maybe never did move much closer to charging Vince McMahon with sexual assault or sex trafficking. And in the case of these quote unquote minor accounting errors, it's not like Vince profited tremendously from this, relatively speaking. He would probably claim that he was not trying to exploit the company and make money. He was trying to protect the company from what he would, frame as false allegations. So that's why he had these NDAs signed and in secret, so that this would not become public and so that the company would not be harmed. It didn't have a great effect, it seems, on the share price to what ultimately did it cause WWE to report slightly higher net income than it did after it made the corrections for these NDAs. But it probably didn't have a huge impact on the share price. Therefore, the most important value in all of our lives at this point, shareholder interests were probably not greatly damaged. But it does seem, if you read that appeals court filing, it sounds like there's plenty of evidence there for fraud and intent, as far as withholding a lot of information from the WWE board. But that being said, it doesn't look like shareholder interests were really damaged that much. The SEC has fined him $400,000 and ordered him to repay WWE for what was at least partly the bonus, probably the extra bonus that he got. So that's my working theory, is that, yeah, he's been dealt with by the SEC. He's been disgraced. He's been pushed out of the company. He had to resign twice, did come back, but he seems to be permanently out now. He doesn't have controlling interest to force his way back in. So that's my read on it. That is just my opinion.
That is the opinion of Brandon Thurston. That I would echo as well. Netflix, the latest data that came out for the February 10th edition of Raw, it was ranked 8th globally at 2.8 million views worldwide, ranking in the top 10 in 4 countries, including Canada, as well as the new the new hotbed of professional wrestling, Nicaragua and Bolivia, along with the United States. These are your core pillars of WWE on Netflix. As the number of countries has, I think this is the lowest number of different countries that it is ranked in the top 10. So now we are seeing like the true nations that are keeping Raw at such a high weekly rate. But Brandon, you have gone into the data because I think a lot of people are trying to make sense of the best way to interpret a lot of these different numbers and how they are calculating it, and including like how they are utilizing the runtime of the show, this one being 1 hour and 51 minutes for this particular edition of Raw. So there is, there's quite a formula to understand all of this.
So as I think Dave Meltzer has pointed out, if you look at their chart, I'm try to explain this in a way that doesn't get too dense into the math. If you look at their chart, they report the number of global views, which is basically, here's the number of accounts on average who watched the entire program. I'll be more clear about what that means. And then they show you the duration of the program, and then they show you the number of hours, the amount of time that in total any given account spent watching this show during this week. And then the views is simply the result of dividing the global hours viewed by the runtime, so that it does come out to being very similar to what we're familiar with from Nielsen, the average minute audience. So that's good. However, if you can actually download a spreadsheet yourself from the Netflix Tudum page, and I have, and you can check this, and if you check on basically all the recent content, it all works out. That math checks out, except for W Raw. Royal Rumble even checks out, which only had 2 days of a window in its measurement. So the Raw numbers are off by some the week before. This one, 3%, 16%, 9%, 10%, 19%, and everything else matches up well. So what's the deal with that? I asked Netflix, and they shared with me this table that explains, the difference between Raw and everything else is that Raw is obviously watched live, or a lot of people also watch it video on demand, as opposed to everything else in their library, which is basically being watched video on demand. It's not live. So what they explained is that they have actually perhaps 4 different durations of a given episode of Raw, and that throws off the math. So whether you're watching it live, you end up getting calculated differently if you're watching it as SVOD, video on demand, so that the duration is, according to this table, is longer for Raw when it's live, versus if you're watching it later, it may be 2.5 hours long versus 3 hours long or something like that. So that's what's happening there. They provided an explanation that makes sense mathematically. I'm sure that people are believing that they're juicing the numbers and that they're being that they're fabricating numbers. I doubt it. So what we have now is we do have this February 10th episode that they reported globally was watched by, across the 7-day period, 2.8 million global views. By a slim margin, that is the lowest one yet of the now 6 episodes that we have data for. Remember, we're getting this a week late, so we don't have this past Monday's episode. We'll get that next week. And I have extrapolated this out into what would it mean if, what would the U.S. viewership be like based on what we do know about the U.S. viewership for the premiere. And I get a result that has it now slightly below where they were in the same period last year on the USA Network. And I've even tried to account for the fact that VideoAmp, which is the source that we have the premier US number from, well, maybe VideoAmp is some 8% more generous than Nielsen, as it was for the Golden Globes on CBS. So if we take that into account and say, oh, maybe Nielsen would measure it 8% less, okay, we've got the 8% less line on the chart too. And again, we get a number that is similar to what they were doing last year, slightly lower than what they were doing last year.
Now that we're this many weeks into things and you're able to get a decent estimate of the U.S. viewership, I mean, where is kind of your thought of what Raw has settled into? Like, just 6 weeks in, is this kind of an expected level of where you kind of thought that Raw viewership would sort of normalize at? Is it above, below expectations? Do you have any kind of concrete thought this many weeks in?
I think this is on the lower end of expectations. This is not a disaster, but it's just because the thought that Netflix is in more homes than USA Network by a widening margin. So their reach should be stronger now in the US than it was before, but it is slightly lower here. Is it way lower? No, but it's slightly lower.
Let's move on to AEW, because they're coming out of this weekend where they made their much anticipated debut in Australia, going to the Brisbane Entertainment Center, and
no ratings yet.
No ratings as of yet, but we should be. There was a holiday on Mondays.
Probably today, though. We should be due for them today. Yeah.
And of course, they had that gigantic lead-in from the NBA All-Star festivities happening on TNT. So this probably will be a very good number for AEW. Definitely one of their best lead-ins they've ever had.
It'll be a big Q1 and QH1 and QH2, and from there on, the audience will diminish, and you can frame that in many ways.
Did you hear that we did have altering start times up here based on, if you were watching it on Triller, it started right at 10:30, but Kate from Montreal, watching it on the USA Network up here in Canada, it did not start until 15 minutes later.
Wow. So were you watching it earlier than the US even on Triller?
We might have been. Did you watch?
I saw people. I watched a lot of it. I saw people tweeting about.
I think TNT and the USA Network were in sync with each other. So I think if you were watching on Triller, you would have been ahead by 10 or 15 minutes.
So I saw people tweeting that there was basically spoilers from other people tweeting.
Well,
now the big subject coming out of this.
I have completely avoided like one of the silliest debates that I can imagine. The size of this ring. If you want to encompass your understanding of all of this, plus your own theory about this, about Ringgate down in Brisbane, the floor is yours, Brandon.
I've been told that they did use a local ring.
Yes.
I know Fightful has reported that was always the plan. It was not a case of like something going wrong and they had to do this. I can understand shipping something like a ring would add expense.
Remember the story about how they had to ship the Elimination Chamber to Perth last year? It was that crazy story Michael Cole conveyed on the broadcast. Like they had to
Pirates, right?
It was bizarre. It was just insane of them transporting that. I don't think PWA or Melbourne Championship Wrestling had an Elimination Chamber in their storage. So
yes, maybe pirate trolls interfered on the way to across the Indian Ocean or something.
Maybe they tried to ship it out of the Gulf of Mexico.
The Gulf of what?
I'm gonna get banned from the Oval Office at this rate.
I'm gonna tell Caroline Leavitt that you said that. So I think I know the claim is that it was a 18-foot ring. That looked like a 16-foot ring to me. And I think AEW. So we discussed this earlier. AEW uses a smaller ring generally than WWE's ring. Would you agree with that?
That's my understanding. Yes, WWE has been a 20 by 20 ring.
Yeah.
Yes.
So WWE uses a 20-foot ring. AEW's ring is smaller, so it's 18 feet, and this was smaller than that. And it was probably a 16-foot ring. That's what it kind of looked like to me. I noticed that it was smaller, so I think it's 16. But nobody's getting the tape measure out, obviously.
Yeah. Well, what would a weekend be if we didn't have some silly controversy? I think at the end of the year we should always look back at like the stupid 24-hour controversies.
What does this say about AEW that they had a 16-foot ring?
I think they should go out of business. That's the end. Like you can't recover from something like that. They had the crowd for all that was made of this show and the change from the stadium to the smaller arena. Like they had the crowd looked great on television, very lively throughout. And maybe to some surprise, they did announce that they would be back in Australia, not specifying where in Australia or when, but sometime in 2026 that they would return to Australia. And I guess if we were at least looking for any indication of some kind of site fee or connection with like a tourism board, there was definitely none of that represented on the broadcast that would indicate that this was that there was a site fee involved. Not saying there's not, just that there typically in these exchanges is that there is a promotion for, your tourism that we did not see reflected on the broadcast.
Yeah, I don't know, but I strongly believe that there was not a site fee. I believe that there were outside promoters that were involved in setting up the show and making the show happen, and that probably led to a greater assurance that this would be a financially beneficial event for AEW to run with minimal financial risk. But I see no reason to believe that there was a government site fee that we call it province, or is it a state in Australia? The local government. I have no reason to believe the local government was paying a site fee for this.
And if you would like, we did have a reporter working for us at the show, Reese Hooker, who was on the review show with Wei Ting and Kate from Montreal over the weekend, discussing his coverage there at the event in Brisbane. He also wrote an article that is up at postwrestling.com. Getting over Down Under, AEW's Rocky debut in Australia. Some people loved my title and let me know it. But yes, folks, I thought a very balanced view of the show, the good and the bad. There was lots of, it was a very well received show on Saturday, but I think you'd be kidding yourself if there was not a lot of angst among those in and around Brisbane that were in the lead up to this show.
And to be clear, this was a show that was supposed to happen in a stadium,
yes.
And clearly there wasn't the demand for a stadium show, and they had to move it to an arena.
Yes. Also on AEW News, it was reported earlier this morning that AEW Double or Nothing is leaving Las Vegas for the first time ever. Actually, no, that's not true because they did do it in Jacksonville during the pandemic twice. So first time with fans anyway. Sunday, May the 25th is AEW's Double or Nothing, which will be in Glendale, Arizona at the Desert Diamond Arena. And
we've got the Undertaker at the top of this article from
yes,
AZ
some great video embed here on AZ Central. I mean, they know exactly how to stoke the flames.
AEW Dynamite show in Phoenix and major pay-per-view, and under that we've got the Undertaker explains how his mentorship gives amateur wrestlers a leg up. Great.
Yes. So yeah, they're in Phoenix tonight for a double taping of Dynamite and Collision, and then this will be the Sunday night pay-per-view, which would mean that they would at least avoid being on the Saturday of the proposed date we know of for Saturday night's main event when Peacock had put those dates up, then removed those dates. But May 24th was the date that they had listed as the next Saturday night's
Double or
main
Nothing
event.
has always been on a Sunday anyway. So
yeah, it's going to be the same weekend regardless. I don't see how much impact that's going to have, a free special versus a pay-per-view the next night. It might have some, but yes, getting out of Vegas, of course, this is a month after WrestleMania and all independent companies under the sun are going to be in Las Vegas and maybe figuring this is going to be too much for the market to be coming back 4 weeks later with a pay-per-view.
Yes. No travel packages to just get people to stay a few extra weeks in Las Vegas.
Can you imagine staying in Las Vegas for a month as a tourist?
No, God, no.
Sorry, folks. I love Vegas, but it's a weekend stop for most. Brandon will be in Las Vegas, everyone. So
yes, there's travel plans in place.
Yeah, is there going to be a meet and greet with Brandon Thurston?
I'm considering doing a seminar where I teach people how to do Excel.
And measuring rings as well. He's got a great eye for those as well.
Yes.
All right. Those are some of your AEW notes. Let's say in an alternate universe, Brandon, I work at WWE and I'm considering one of the perks of working at WWE is I get is my stock package. And for years, there have been some incentives if you're a company employee. Can you explain how this is changing under the TKO regime and the stock purchase program that some employees at WWE, I'm sure, are going to be listening here with a lot of bated breath to hear Brandon Thurston explain how their stock purchase program is now working under the new ownership.
Yeah, I don't want to frame this as like earth-shattering, but this was brought to my attention so this is a question that's been raised in a number of town hall meetings since the TKO merger. WWE employees before the merger were able to use their paycheck money to buy W shares at a 15% discount. This is something that was asked. They have not been able to do that since the TKO merger. They have been asking questions about that at these town hall meetings, including the one where Triple H was the announcement that Triple H is going to go into the Hall of Fame. And they finally got a definitive answer that no, this will not be continuing since the TKO merger. You will not be able to buy shares at a discount. There are still, of course, stock options for employees. I'm told mostly it's executive level employees, though.
All right. And what is the latest on this? Can you talk about this case that you are monitoring, or are we still in the early stages of you uncovering this details?
Yes, we can talk. So as we've discussed this before, this is not a well-covered story, but there's a shareholder lawsuit that's happening related to the merger. This is a class action shareholder lawsuit. There have been class action shareholder lawsuits at various times in WWE's history. This is another iteration where this class is claiming that this merger that WWE did with Endeavor, this is what they alleged. This was predetermined. Vince McMahon forced his way back into the company. He decided that he was just going to make a deal with his friend Ari Emanuel, and there wasn't an honest shopping process to find the best deal for shareholders is essentially what this shareholder class is arguing. So this is still underway. It's in the Delaware Court of Chancery, not reverse chancery, just regular chancery, which makes it hard to get the documents. But as the minutes and hours have led up to this broadcast, I've found a way to obtain some of these documents. So I don't know if there's anything earth-shattering here, but it is notable that everybody under the sun who had anything to do with this merger, including everybody on the board of directors, Notably, though, Steve Koonin and Frank Riddick have been dropped from this case for some reason. But basically, anybody who was an advisor, if you're a white shoe law firm that came anywhere near this merger, you've been subpoenaed. So it looks like discovery is happening. Vince is being subpoenaed. Stephanie has been subpoenaed. Or I don't know that Vince has been subpoenaed, but he's been many filings here have his name on it, and he's the first set of interrogatories, basically questions I think that the plaintiffs want to ask him. Nick Khan is mentioned in here, Paul Levesque, even members of the board who resigned in the midst of Vince's comeback, like Manjit Singh and Ignacio Laud, have been subpoenaed. So there's not big substantive information, but just to say that this shareholder lawsuit is moving forward and it's not going away.
Yeah, I can just imagine if there's like a stack of envelopes on Vince McMahon's desk. This one hasn't even been opened yet. I mean,
he has separate counsel from WWE, as he does in all of his other litigation that he's going through.
All right, we have a few super chats to get to. First of all, Rolando becoming a new member. Thank you very much, Rolando. We go to Jake from the Windy City. His questions are the chances of WrestleMania in London, England now slimming? At this point, I see Saudi Arabia more likely to host one before London with big rights fees. So London, just a quick history, is that WWE was somewhat being courted by Mayor Sadiq Khan in London, and to the point that Paul Levesque and Nick Khan did meet with Sadiq Khan, who has been one of the rare politicians to have photo ops with both Tony Khan, Nick Khan, and Paul Levesque, and receive championship belts. Still one of the most bizarre photo ops that this company has ever engaged in, and there's definitely...
We're referring to the tiny WWE championship belt.
Yes, the smallest championship belt I have ever seen, and maybe this was a sign that we love you, London, but you're not getting...
I've heard that this was a gauntlet. This was like a wrist piece of merchandise. Like
I'm sure Sadiq Khan is wearing it on a daily basis as he makes some of his biggest decisions and policies.
Yes.
I would say the understanding has always been that London is like you're looking at what are you going to get out of London, which is a huge...
John Cena campaigned on this.
He did. He very much tried. And John Cena has been announced for Raw in London next month, among other European dates he is doing. But yes, with Vegas this year, and the expectation that New Orleans will happen next year, and that could be announced as early as this week when SmackDown is in town. I would say London. I wouldn't be holding my breath for an immediate WrestleMania announcement. It's going to come down to like what London would be offering, and if they would be incentivized to compete like for a major fee, because I don't think WWE is going there unless they are so incentivized.
And I believe Indianapolis is
Indianapolis is going to be
part of their deal.
Yes, it is.
Not sure about Minnesota. They were trying to get this coming year's WrestleMania, but that didn't work out for them.
And as Jake mentions, like Saudi Arabia, it feels like the Royal Rumble next January is sort of just a dress rehearsal for a bigger show at some point, and you would think a WrestleMania is certainly a more likely possibility now that they are taking the Rumble there and what is to be derived from Saudi Arabia for such an event.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't totally rule out London, but maybe not in the nearest years. Yeah.
All right. Another one here from Jumanji Hunter. What are your thoughts on WWE's failure to retain new Netflix viewers, or do you think it says more about putting more live shows on streaming? I guess if you're looking at the premise here of that week one number, I mean, it was never going to be a case where you were going to be sustaining that week one number. I think you want to be... The question becomes, have they normalized to such a lower figure than expected? And I mean, it's arguable. I mean, you were going to get, there was so much promotion for that first week. And yeah, I mean, this is maybe slightly lower than where you thought it might be on a global level, but there's also the fact that this is, like, I imagine there are a lot of viewers that are not on Netflix, that are not going to be necessarily your, like, that 50 plus audience that was really the core of WWE during
like half of the traditional viewing audience. Yeah,
exactly. Like, you would think like there's a healthy percentage of that just in the US alone that would not be the high percentage audience that is subscribing to Netflix that are no longer getting Raw on Monday night, and they're not going to be signing up for Netflix beyond that. The key has been WWE has been able to cultivate a much younger audience over these last few years, and that is, long term the value they see in Netflix.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see this as a huge failure. I know there's, I mean, if you're coincidentally a big AEW fan and you dislike WWE, you might position this as a huge failure. But I think this is maybe a little under expectations, but it's pretty close to what they were delivering on USA, and so I think that's okay. It is on the lower end, and maybe it's a matter of what you just said, John, that the older audience that was so reliable to watch these shows on cable, maybe they don't tend to have Netflix, and it hasn't caused them to sign up.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for the questions. As always, you can send them in throughout the show. And as we wrap things up here, you can always go and subscribe to patreon.com/WrestleNomics or WrestleNomics on Substack, and you can get the WrestleNomics report, where some of the stories we talked about you would have gotten several days earlier with Brandon's breakdown. And then over at postwrestlingcafe.com, a bunch of shows up this week, including a full review and analysis of SNL 50 from this past Sunday with myself, Jordan Goodman, and Braden Harrington as we went through that particular show. And I'm back tonight with Wei Ting after Dynamite from Phoenix.
Yes.
The mecca of AEW over the next few months.
Isn't this where Bryan Danielson lives? Nearby?
Yeah, I think that's where they were last living. So yeah, maybe we'll see Bryan Danielson hanging out.
Or by Double or Nothing, maybe.
Perhaps so. There you go. That is it for us. Thank you to everybody for tuning in, and to Aaron Rupar for joining us as well. You can catch all of his work at publicnotice.co. That's his Substack that he runs, and a prolific follow as well on X, on Blue Sky, and navigating the choppiest of waters in these political times. I can only imagine that man's mentions and what he gets on a daily basis. But nonetheless, these are the times we live in. So thanks, everyone, for joining us. We will be back next Wednesday, same time and place, 1 p.m. Eastern, every Wednesday here on WrestleNomics and Post Wrestling.